My first encounter with both fathers was, I should say the work of both fathers, was the seminal Japanese Ceramics Today exhibition at the Smithsonian in 1982. Inspired by this amazing exhibition and the range of work put together by Madame Kikuchi Tomo, I was driven to pursue this field as a dealer. So not long after 1983, I managed an introduction to Kikuchi Tomo, and upon entering her reception Genkan in her guest pavilion, which is where the Musée Tomo is now located, the first work that I saw was a work of Suzuki Osamu, the father. It was a large Shino geometric abstract sculpture, and my jaw fell open and I was smitten immediately. And unfortunately for me in those early days, something like that was so far beyond my ability to bring to America and find someone who would buy it, that the bar was set at a ridiculously high level, which prevented me from actually daring to go visit the Suzuki family for nearly 30 years. But this seminal experience with the work of Suzuki Osamu convinced me that early on that the sculptural side and the integration of creative form together with traditional firm grounding and traditional techniques was the way I wanted to present Japanese ceramics in America. And likewise, the work of Wakao Toshisada, there's some beautiful boxes in that show. I just had to meet these people eventually. So I started to acquire the work by both of these artists by visiting Kikuchi Tomo, who supplied me with wonderful, wonderful works. But I never dared go to Tajimi to meet them. So while I was going to Tajimi to meet other artists like Kato Tsubusa or Kato Yasukage or Suzuki Goro, I always felt that those two artists were way above, shall we say, my pay grade. But then in 2013, I decided when I was bringing a few passionate collectors to Japan on travels, that I would dare go there and see what I could arrange. However, getting entrance to this bastion of Shino was not so easy. It took every connection I had, letters from curators, a personal call from Kikuchi Tomo, and after I think about a year and a half, I was granted an audience. So there I go off to Tajimi to meet both of these tremendously talented men. And we bonded very well, and all of the kind of Japanese protocol met with a wonderful resolution. It's and hence why I say it's quite an honor to be the first to bring all four of these artists to America in their first collective show internationally ever done. The added bonus was back in 2013-14 was meeting the Sons, whose work I had only seen in competitive show catalogs with little tiny thumbnails. And as I've made repeated visits to both workshops, the work of Wakao Kei and Suzuki Tetsu has only improved over time. Then in 2018, when I started work on my Allure book, The Allure of Contemporary Ceramics, the idea of doing a father-son show came to me as a collaborative show. I wanted to call the attention to the American collecting public the unique challenge in Japan of achieving artistic independence within the constraints of centuries-old tradition, and the bonds of family, particularly strong in Japan, in a society like Japan, so structured. So that's how we got to the present and this show. And we're going to hear tonight from two distinguished panelists from academia and museum world, followed by the artists themselves, which we'll get to. But first I wanted to just welcome you all and mention that on tonight's Zoom call, we have, 12 curators from museums from coast to coast. We have 1 conservator, 2 Japanese contemporary ceramic appraisers, and a significant number of academicians from the world of universities who have tuned in tonight for the opportunity to hear about the traditions of Shino and Oribe, Motoyashki. We also have dealers and a few museum docents. And of course, this is the silver lining. Not only can we have more than the 50 people that I can squeeze into my gallery to hear all of this, but we can have people in 12 different time zones who can then sleep in their own beds and eat at their own table and enjoy what we have to say. And I do believe we have 2 surprise guests that if you flip through your cards who said they were coming. We have Akiyama Yo Sensei and Kondo Takahiro Sensei, who will both be participants in our next call, Zoom call in November. I also want to thank briefly my staff, my new team, who have put this all together for you, Karen, Bonnie, Yukiko, and Chelsea. It's been a struggle, but I think we got it together actually at the last minute today. So I would like to now introduce our speakers. Monica Bensick, I'm sure, is known to the vast majority of you, specializes in Japanese decorative arts, especially lacquer, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She grew up in Budapest, Hungary, and received her PhD from the University of Budapest and a second PhD from the Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto. She has co-curated several exhibitions at the Met, including Japanese bamboo art, the Abbey collection, which traveled to several venues in Japan. Most recently, Monica curated the well-received and recently reopened and reinstalled exhibition, Kyoto, Capital of Artistic Imagination. So those of you lucky enough to be in New York, I highly recommend making a pilgrimage back to the Met to see the new pieces in their new rotation. Also in that show, there are many Kyoto ceramists, both with us today, alive and dead, so there's much to be seen. Monica was named the first Diane and Abbey curator for Japanese decorative arts at the Metropolitan Museum. Andrew Matsky, who I can't call Andrew, sorry, I have to call him Andy, is Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Kentucky. His numerous publications on Japanese ceramics include Potters and Patrons in Edo period Japan, Takatori Ware, and the Kuroda Domain from 2011. Most recently, he wrote the introduction for me for Restraint and Flamboyance on Meno ceramics. And of course, Andy is well regarded as a teacher on Japanese art history. He is currently the guest curator of an exhibition of works on Japanese women artists that is scheduled to open at the Denver Art Museum in 2022. We'll keep our fingers crossed. And he is also the president of the Japanese Art History Forum, an international electronic forum for emerging and established professionals in our field. We have our 2 artists with us. If we can go to the next slide. Unfortunately, with us will be virtually Suzuki Osamu Sensei, and he is unable at age 86 to join us at this early hour tonight, but he has sent us a message, so maybe we could hear what he'd like to say to this audience.
たびたびご連絡いただいてありがとうございます。この度は親子で展覧会を500回になりますけども、ニューヨークでできるということは非常に嬉しく思っております。何かとお世話かけますが、よろしくお願いいたします。
Suzuki Osamu first learned ceramics at the knee of his father as the eldest son. Through exhausting experimentation, he has developed his own Shino-yaki that, while viewed as traditional Shino, possesses an air of modernity and dynamism that's really not found elsewhere in Japan. While he's principally devoted to the Shino tradition, he has also produced wonderful Oribe and black seto ware, predominantly for the tea ceremony, although as I just said, I adore his sculpture just as well. In 1994, he was designated only the second national living treasure in Ningen Kokoho after Arakawa Toyozo for Shino Yaki. I believe Sensei can be seen as a new type of living national treasure, one who continues to clarify the modern meaning of traditional Shino, yet who continues to create surprisingly modern, contemporary, challenging, and overtly sculptural forms. It is truly unfortunate he cannot join us in person this evening, but he has responded to our questions, and his responses will be articulated by his wonderful son, Tetsu. Tetsu originally had no intention of being a potter or ceramicist. While he, as a boy, helped his father in glaze presentation and preparation and firing, his goal, believe it or not to all of us here, was to be a museum curator. As a college student, he majored in history and studied Buddhist art, but at the suggestion of one of his teachers, he enrolled in a professional ceramics institute and soon realized that he, like his father, was actually born to be a ceramist. Suzuki Tetsu endeavors to create highly original teaware, unconstrained by traditional rules of Japanese ceramics. His works are covered in his signature Oribe-like copper green glaze. His goal is to imbue his work with a contemporary sensibility that is enticing, hopefully, to a younger generation of clay enthusiasts. And our final participant is Tomo Zawa, who's helped us before. She is what she calls a cultural translator, a term coined by her friend, and ends up what she does quite brilliantly. Born into a family of craftsmen, her mother is a weaver and her father is a craftsman of koto musical instruments. She now writes and translates mainly in the field of Japanese crafts and culture, bridging cultures of different countries, generations, and societies. So there you have our lineup of participants. And now I would like to open our discussion with questions to our panelists. So Andy, I'd like to ask the first question to you, if that's okay, if you're there. So let's start from the beginning and give everyone in this group a little background. Can you tell us about the role of the Meno region in the history of Japanese ceramics?
So the ceramics history of the Meno region cannot really be understood without considering its location in the wider area of central Japan, as we see on the map here. Meno is adjacent to the area of Seto and Sanage on the other side. Seto Sanage is the true home of Japanese high-fired ceramics. The earliest high-temperature glazed ceramics were produced in the Sanage region in the 8th century, and this example in the Tokyo National Museum is particularly outstanding. But we notice that the glaze is really pretty rudimentary. By the 11th century, the technology had spread to the Seto region just to the northeast. In the 13th century, the Seto region developed its own distinctive style, today called Koseto, which means Old Seto. Over the centuries, potters and their technology gradually spread north to Meno. In the latter part of the 16th century, the first uniquely Meno ceramic types emerged. Although known as black Seto and yellow Seto, which we see here, these two types were made only in the Meno region. The black Seto and yellow Seto vessels were made in a new type of kiln called a great kiln, or oogama. The great kiln here in the middle allowed for greater control and the ability to fire more pieces than the old style of kiln called the tunnel kiln, or anagama, which is illustrated at the top. Around the turn of the 17th century, two new ceramic styles emerged in Meno, both of which featured the innovation of painted designs. The Ogama kilns began to produce Shino ware, the ceramic style embraced by Suzuki Osamu, while craftsmen using a new type of kiln, the climbing kiln, or noborigama, at the bottom of this diagram, began what is now known as Oribe ware. The style continued today by Suzuki Tetsu. These two styles appear to have been produced around the same time, the first 3 decades of the 17th century. Shino ware was the more conservative of the two, although its white color and painted designs were not truly conservative, they were actually very innovative. However, Oribe ware, although made nearby and at the same time as Shino, contrasted even more. The more consistent temperatures of the climbing kiln gave Oribe ceramics sharper designs than Shino. Moreover, the widespread use of copper green glaze made Oribe ware more striking in appearance. Actually, recently I've begun to wonder if there was a strong sense of competition between the Ogama potters of Shino ware and the Noborigama potters of Oribe, because they were both active at the same time in the early 17th century. However, after 1640, the popularity of both these styles waned, and they ceased to be produced until they were revived in the 19th century. And ironically, the revival of these Meno wares of Shino and Oribe took place not in Meno, but actually in the adjacent area of Seto.
Andy, maybe you could explain a little bit more about how we get from late Meiji and early 20th century revival to the 20th century, and how these traditions came to fruition in our time, and how Suzuki Osamu's work fits within that.
Sure. Although the style of Meno ware, particularly Shino and Oribe types, was revived in the 19th century, everyone at that time, including the potters themselves who were doing those revival pieces, mistakenly thought that Oribe and Shino wares had originated in Seto. This opinion changed quickly in the early 1930s following the discovery by Arakawa Toyozo, who's shown here on the left, a potter from Meno, who discovered Shino ware ceramic shards in the hills of his home province of Meno. With help, he and his friends uncovered the site of the Mutabora kiln, an Ogama that had fired Shino ware back in the early 17th century. And this is actually a painting by Arakawa himself of that scene. Among Arakawa's finds were 2 shards of a cylindrical Shino tea bowl decorated with a bamboo shoot design. It was not long before Arakawa discovered that these shards corresponded closely to a complete tea bowl that had been handed down for centuries in the branch of the ruling Tokugawa family that occupied the castle in nearby Nagoya. They were known as the Nagoya Tokugawa family. Later, other kilns in Meno were excavated, including the famed Motoyashki Kiln shown here. This kiln is considered to be the first climbing kiln constructed in Meno, and also the first to fire Oribe ware. It was rediscovered in the early 1930s, shortly after Arakawa-san found the Mutabora site. This is one of the pieces that was discovered in the kiln site. This individual food dish used in the tea ceremony is known as a mukozuke. And although it's complete in its form, you can tell from the muted colors that it was misfired. And so it was discarded at the site, only to be recovered in the mid 20th century. Well, Mr. Arakawa was able to use what he learned from recovered pieces such as these to create his own versions of Shino, Oribe, and even black and yellow seto wares. One of his assistants was Suzuki Michio, a local craftsman who was indeed the father of Suzuki Osamu, featured in this exhibition. So in terms of craft lineage, we can consider Suzuki Osamu to be the artistic grandson of Arakawa Toyozo, and Suzuki Tetsu to be his great-grandson. And Dr. Monica Bensick will be telling us a bit more about this as well.
Andy, thank you very much. The historical context is so important to be able to truly appreciate the work of both of these men. That's perfect. So as Andy said, I'd like to turn our attention to Monica and to ask her, as a curator at the Met, how she would contextualize using historical material together with contemporary material, and what way might she think about how to use Osamu's work and Tetsu's work within her galleries?
Good evening. It is my great pleasure to join you tonight, and I look forward to discussing further the Shino and Oribet traditions. Contemporary Shino ware, such as Suzuki Osamu's two tea bowls, can be very easily juxtaposed with historical works, such as the tea bowl on the top, which is in the Met's collection. Shino ware produced in the Meno kilns during the Momoyama period are characterized by a heavy body and coarse glaze, qualities appreciated by tea masters such as Sen Norikyu. This bowl was produced before the introduction of the improved multi-chamber climbing kiln, the Noborigama. And the decoration is a simple linear design of a bridge and a shrine. There are actually several Shino tea bowls with a similar composition, making a reference to Sumiyoshi Bridge and Sumiyoshi Shrine, or to the tale of Genji, the divine princess at the Uji Bridge chapter. As we are discussing Oribe and Shino today, I wanted to introduce a U-ware also in the Met's collection that belongs to the Shino Oribe type. Shino ware was the first to incorporate decorative designs applied by brush before glazing. In the Shino Oribe style, they applied a light, almost transparent glaze that clearly showed the underlying iron glaze design. Many of these compositions included pictorial elements. In my next slide, I would like to introduce a museum setting. Of course, the Shino and Oribe tea bowls, water jars, and mukozuke dishes can be best contextualized in a tea setting. A tea room, as the one in the Met's galleries, allows the curator to create Tori Awase style installation in which historical artworks can be paired with contemporary examples. Also, it is a good way to show a tea bowl as if it was in use. The natural materials of the tea room, the tatami mat's color, emphasize the utensil's texture and colors, shapes, and it is easier to imagine how the tea bowl would look like with matcha tea in it. The other case next to the tea room shows a juxtaposition of Tsujiga Hanako soda fragment, a Kodaiji lacquer ewer, and swirl fittings and a calligraphy, all from the Momoyama period. These type of artworks often inspired compositions and patterns featured on Oribe. In my next slide, I would like to show another installation where the early 17th century Narumi Oribe type ewer with cherry blossoms and picnic curtain from the Burke collection is shown together with a set of 6 Oribe Yashijida type mukozuke dishes with a striped lacquer food box, a Kodaiji lacquer incense burner, and sword fittings, all from the Momoyama period, so it's very easy to see the connection between various media. The following slide will show another installation in the gallery that brought together Rinpa style artworks. The contemporary Nakamura Takuo piece was juxtaposed with Ogata Kenzan and Rinpa style artworks, which works very well. And this is a good example how to tell the story of a style which was transmitted through generations and revived several times through the centuries. The following slide will explain the revival of the Oribet tradition. The two Momoyama period Oribe serving dishes, the mukozuke, were made in a mold and reproduced the shape of arrows. On each, a copper green glaze was poured over both the interior and exterior of two opposite corners, creating green patches. Between the patches, a geometric pattern appears, and this is a young pine painted in brown iron wash. The geometric pattern is inspired by textiles, a tie-dye technique called shibori, which was very popular on Tsujigahana silks. The large square dish is actually from the mid-19th century, and it's a representative of the revival of the Oribe style that took place in Seto. The decoration uses an Oribe vocabulary with abstract and geometric motifs painted in iron brown on white ground, flanked by copper green patches that run blue in some areas. It was actually made by Kato Soshiro, one of the famous early 19th century potters who worked in the Oribe style. In the lower corner is a large So Oribe style platter by Suzuki Osamu. The thick green glaze covers the whole surface of the vessel and has various hues of green and yellow. The upper part is decorated with small imprinted flower patterns, while the surface texture is created by the dynamic brushstrokes. Following slide will highlight a work by Suzuki Tetsu. This is his green copper Oribe vase, and this is a representative work of his signature style. Suzuki Tetsu was captivated by the beauty of green. His green glaze is ash-based and creates a very thick layer which has deep colors. He uses comb marks and very thick brush marks to create texture. The texture helps to bring out the various hues of the beautiful copper green glaze. Next to it is a work by Kato Yasukage, who died tragically young, who was also born into an illustrious Meno potting family and became the 14th generation head of the workshop. The workshop is located nearby the Motoyashki Kiln, and Yasukage specialized in copper green Oribe and Shino ware. So I wanted to emphasize this very compelling comparison between Tetsu's vase and this wonderful sculptural form. Yasukage brought together various traditions, including sculpture and studies in bizen, which he utilized to create wood fire formed, covered in thick green Oribe glazes. Following with another contemporary Oribe artist, Suzuki Goro, who is focusing on Momoyama-inspired Meno wares, which include Shino, Oribe, Setoguro, and Kiseto. Instead of copying classical designs and forms, he creates unique compositions, blending the traditions of dark brown and green Oribe glazes with whimsical motifs of lamps, nude women, geometric patterns, and circular forms. This example is in the Metz collection, thanks to Alice and Halsey North. Next to it is a Unomi by Suzuki Tetsu, and I would like to highlight the beautiful colors of the Oribe glaze. He uses the traditional copper glaze, but he adds bengara or cobalt to create the blue hue in the glaze, and it kind of gives a feeling if the tea ball had a pattern on it. Following, sorry, that was my last slide.
Okay, Thank you, Monica. Just for the record, the cup is not a Yunomi, it's actually a chawan.
Oh, sorry, chawan.
When you come to see it in the show, you will find it's substantive and heavy and really strong. And I actually happen to have it with me here. So you can, the color is off because of my lighting here, but you can see how large it is. Very, very large. So Monica, I think it's time to ask the first question of Suzuki Osamu that we submitted to him since he was unable to join us ahead of time. And I believe Suzuki Tetsu will respond in his father's voice.
Okay, so here is the first question. You started firing your works in a gas kiln instead of the traditional makigama used in Meno. How does it affect the style of your works?
今日は父親が、ここにいませんので、私が代わりに、代読します。伝統とは革新だと考えます。イノベーションです。その折々の技術革新によって新しい焼き物を作り出しております。ガス窯で初めてシノで、挑戦しましたが、わからないことが多く、随分と苦労しました。しかし、少しずつですが、いろんなことが分かってきました。桃山時代の窯跡を調べた際に、生焼けというのは、焼成温度に達していないためによく溶けていないものですが、それが周辺に多く落ちていました。この時代の陶片を私のガス窯に入れて焼いてみましたが、これで多くのことを学びました。
So Monica, perhaps you want to talk to Tetsu himself about your questions regarding Oribe yaki.
Yes. So could you tell us about why you were attracted to Oribe? You always create very rich texture for your pieces. How do you work with the clay to achieve these tactile surfaces?
その5番ですか。オリベの魅力というのは、その多種多様さにあると思います。総オリベだったり、ナルミオリベ、黒オリベ、オリベ、伊賀オリベ、シノオリベなどなどいろいろありますが、私はそのオリベ油の緑色が好きで、その悠長の美しさを前面に出そうとして仕事しています。私はそのオリベ油を使っているんですけれども、オリベという範疇で語ることのできない新しい焼き物を作りたいというそうした思いから、私は作品名をオリベとは、呼ばずに緑油と名付けています。オリベ油は、器の表面を豊かにしてくれるんです。ろくろでひいたまだ柔らかいうちに、ベニヤ板を使ってベニヤ板を割ってギザギザになったものをでそうしたもので串目を入れたりもしました。また、泥を表面に塗って、流れを表現したりもしてきました。最近は、竹が勢いよく成長していくことをイメージして、作品を作っています。
Andy, turning back my attention to you. Let's talk about Chawan. It's such an important part of the oeuvre of both of these men. Can you talk about the historic importance of Chawan in the Meno tradition? And if some of the people in our audience who are less experienced are attracted to the allure and the beauty of a Chawan, how would you guide them towards being able to determine what is a successful tea bowl and what is less desirable in a Chawan?
Sure, I love talking about tea bowls. I started taking lessons in Japanese Chanoyu tea about 30 years ago, and I think the tea bowl is a often misunderstood type of ceramic ware. There are people all over the world making quote unquote tea bowls. But in Japan, a tea bowl is specifically a bowl made for use in cha-no-yu, also known as Japanese tea ceremony. Therefore, the tactile and functional aspects of the bowl are as important as its appearance. Ideally, a bowl should be held and handled before purchase. In fact, a Japanese potter does not dare to make a tea bowl unless he has mastered the various aspects that make a tea bowl functional. In general, for Japanese, a tea bowl that is not functional within the context of cha-no-yu is really just an ordinary bowl, best used for soup or perhaps to occupy some space on a shelf. So this diagram tells us a little bit about the things that a Japanese potter that Mr. Suzuki Sr. and Mr. Suzuki Jr. have. These are not things they think about when they make a tea bowl. These are things that they already learned when they made their very first tea bowl that went to a purchaser. These are things that are essential for any tea bowl in the traditional sense. And certainly there are tea bowls that are pushing the boundaries these days. But these are the sorts of things that a lot of attention is paid to by Japanese potters making tea bowls. And there are reasons for this, because if they are going to function in a cha-no-yu gathering, you need to be careful that, for example, the lip and the mouth are smooth enough and soft enough, not rough, so that when you put it to your mouth, which you do, of course, in drinking tea, it's not uncomfortable. Moreover, the outer area needs to be, the body needs to be smooth and nice to the touch. The inner area, the bowl is manipulated in the course of cha-no-yu. So a cloth is used to wipe the inside after it's been rinsed and warmed. So there's attention paid to the wiping area. If you have little rough places in there, the cloth will catch on it, and that doesn't work. Below that is the whisking area where the tea is actually whisked, and if that has rough places, it will damage the tea whisk. So that also has to be smooth. At the bottom, the tea pool is a place where, as you hold the bowl and drink the tea from it, you drink it in sips. And so at the very end, a little bit of tea will remain in the bottom. If the bottom of the bowl is flat, that tea will spread out, and it's difficult to get the tea together to drink it all up at the end. Because in cha-no-yu, when you're served a bowl of tea, you drink all of the tea. And in fact, you make a little noise at the end, which tells the host, I've finished drinking my tea. So the tea pool is purposely constructed by the potter to gather that tea into one place. So at the very end, you can make this sound that tells the host you've completed drinking your tea. Another important part about the tea bowl is actually the underside of the tea bowl, which we see here on the bottom. Tea bowls in general, or traditionally, were not completely covered in glaze. The raw clay or the unglazed clay was an aspect of appreciation. So there is what is called on the left, lower left, tsuchi mise, or a clay reveal, where a user can turn the bowl after drinking that last bit of tea can turn over the bowl and appreciate the clay of the foot. The clay also in that area has the edge of the glaze, which is another aspect of appreciation. The cut of the foot also adds to the overall shape of the bowl and is appreciated. So all the aspects that you see here on the screen are things that a tea bowl owner should be attuned to and be acquainted with in terms of appreciation. In terms of the best way to know what is a good tea bowl, I would suggest that maybe short of actually taking lessons in Cha no Yu, which is not really possible for everyone, it's a great idea to see and handle works by outstanding potters such as Suzuki Osamu Sensei. You're still muted, Joan.
Thank you, Andy. That was an amazing summary of a very complicated and long history of Chawan appreciation. And I would second the idea of actual touch as being really important, to be able to handle them and seeing how it feels in your hand versus someone else's hand. And what might feel great in a 5 foot tall woman's hand will feel really wimpy in a 6'5" gentleman's hand. And it becomes a very personal experience on how that piece fits within your hand and how it speaks to you as to what its face is. That was great. And I think, Andy, you have a question for Suzuki Osamu through Tetsu-san about the tea bowl tradition and the creation of tea bowls, correct?
Yes, so I wondered when Osamu Sensei makes a tea bowl, what he thinks about. Does he have an image in his mind, or are there some ideas about how he might approach it? Or, you know, as a non-potter myself, those aspects are very intriguing to me. So I'd love to hear what Tetsu Sensei has to say about it.
シノを作るようになってから自然について考えるようになりました。それは松尾芭蕉の老いの小文、また世阿弥の風刺家電、華経などから学んでいます。茶碗については桃山の名品を手に持ってよく見ることから多くのことを学びました。また自然をスケッチすることから茶碗の形を想像します。例えば山や海とか、木々や花、野菜、果物、種など、さらには石、岩などを参考にしています。こうした工程は大変面白い作業です。
Just add to
Andy, just the literary references, I'm sure, are elusive to a large portion of our audience, and maybe as an academician you could illuminate that a little bit.
Yeah, so Zeami, who was mentioned, was one of the founders of the No drama. He wrote some of the most famous No plays that survive and are still performed today. He was active in the 14th to 15th centuries. And Matsuo Basho is maybe familiar to more people. He is known as the father of haiku, which in his time was known by the term hoku. But the really intriguing thing about what Osamu Sensei said via Tetsu-san was that neither of these writers wrote about ceramics, much less made them. So what he apparently, or what he said he thinks about, are broader aesthetic issues, ideas about aesthetics, ideas about nature. And you can see his drawings. He's drawing some tea bowl shapes, but he's trying to draw connections to other aspects of the natural world. Because I think this is because, as I said earlier, all of those basic aspects of a tea bowl, he already knows. He knows how to make a tea bowl. He doesn't have to think about the tea bowl. To go beyond the tea bowls he's already made to a new tea bowl that remains to be made out there in the ether, he's bringing in these ideas from 14th century, 17th century, from nature, from fruits, from flowers, from cliffs, all of these things to create his tea bowls, which to me is really quite amazing.
Thank you. That's perfect, Andy. Thank you. And I know at this point you have a question, I believe, for Tetsu-san.
Yes. So, when making multiple bowls in one session, I guess usually potters don't just make a single bowl, they will make several bowls. How do the changes occur from one bowl, from the first bowl to the second bowl, from the second bowl to the third bowl? That process is something I'm very intrigued with. Can you explain that a little bit?
いつも一度に、30案ぐらい仕上げます。ろくろを引いているとき、いつもそれから削っているとき、施油しているとき、それぞれイメージがあって、それに沿って作業しています。その際に、すべて同じ仕事をしているわけではなくて、一つの茶碗を仕上げて、次の茶碗の仕上げに移っていく際には、また違うことを考えています。例えば、その高台を削る際、いつも名碗と言われている茶碗をイメージして削ることが多いんですが、シノの名碗と言われている卯の花垣だったり、羽衣だったり、そうした茶碗に何とか近づけないかと、道具を作り直したりしながら試行錯誤を繰り返してやっています。
Now we're going to turn our attention to a different aspect of the Japanese ceramic tradition, and actually Japanese craft tradition, which is the concept of ningen kokuho, or national living treasures. And this is an area that Monica has spent a lot of time researching at various points of her career. And I think I would like Monica to tell us a little bit about the true significance and the means by which an artist or a craftsperson is selected for this unique designation and honor.
With pleasure. So, protection of cultural heritage in Japan began in 1871 when the government started to record important artworks. The law for preservation of national treasure was formulated in 1929. An updated legislation was passed in 1950 as the law for protection of cultural properties. Traditional crafts and performing arts were included as intangible cultural properties. Those fields of decorative arts which were considered of especially high historical or artistic value were registered and named as important intangible cultural properties. The persons or groups who represent a certain area are called holders of important intangible cultural properties and became known as living national treasures. Now we have 56 fields of decorative arts in this living national treasure system. The decorative arts are divided into 8 categories, including ceramic, textile, lacquer, metal, dolls, wood and bamboo, paper, and other. These categories are further divided into a number of more specific subcategories. The Living National Treasure designation is not an award system for the individuals themselves, but rather a way of preserving the skills they hold and ensure that they can be passed down to future generations. The number of living national treasures is limited and only one artist can be designated to represent a particular field. The title is irrevocable. Let's see how many living national treasures we have in ceramic art. So as you can see, we have currently 9 living national treasures representing various areas of ceramic art. Suzuki Osamu is the holder of the title in Shino ware, and we have artists representing white porcelain, underglazed gold application, Byzantine, iron glazing, celadon, black settle. Let's see in the next slide a few examples by these artists. So probably you can recognize immediately the beautiful T-ball on the top by Suzuki Osamu and the black settle ware by Kato Kozo. You will remember many of these from Joan's gallery. The beautiful Byzantine ware by Isezaki Jun is from the North collection, now in the mat. And the 2 white porcelain pieces are by Maeda Akihiro and Inoue Manji. And the gold leaf application, a beautiful this, is by Yoshita Minori. I would like to show 3 T-balls and explain a little bit about the significance of transmitting traditions in the living national treasure system. The T-ball on the left side is a Momoyama T-ball named Hirosawa. It has iron oxide painting on the body under the thick creamy white Shino glaze. It has straight walls, a very wide mouth, and a very stable foot, a relatively thin walls, and it feels very sturdy, very relaxed. So you can recognize the qualities of the Momoyama Shino ware. The T-ball on the top is by Arakawa Toyozo, who is the first living national treasure in Shino ware. He made this T-ball in 1953 for the first Japanese traditional art craft exhibition. It has a round shape, which gives a modern feeling to it. The red hue covers almost the whole surface of the T-ball. So all the characteristics of the Momoyama period are present, but Arakawa was able to create his own style, which was sometimes even called as Arakawa Shino. The T-ball in the bottom corner is by Suzuki Osamu. It's also a Shino chawan made in 2012. And you can immediately see the stylistic differences. You can recognize the texture. You can recognize the unique shape, which tells the story of Suzuki Osamu's own take on Shino ware. If you look at the glaze, you might be able to recognize the gas firing and all the technical aspects that we already discussed. But the point of the Living National Treasure system is that the technical traditions that were developed in the Momoyama period transmitted to our generation, but it's always modernized, it's always updated, and the Living National Treasure system is based on the idea that the vessels should be functional. So these are mainly functional artworks opposed to sculptural forms, which is more for the younger generation, but we will talk more about this with Tetsu-san.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I think I have a question.
Yes, Nick. I think it's time for you to ask a question to Osamu Sensei via Tetsu-san regarding his experience as a Ningen Koboho.
So altogether, 166 artists have been designated as living national treasures in the field of Japanese decorative arts. Now we have 56 active artists. Suzuki Sensei is the second living national treasure after Arakawa Toyozo to represent Shino ware. Did Arakawa have any influence on your work? And in conjunction with this question, I also would like to know a little bit about how you apprenticed with your father.
父親の代読しますね。荒川豊蔵先生が京都の宮永東山さんのところで工場長をしておられた際、私の親父、が勤めることをお願いしたら、美濃から来たということで認めていただいたようです。親父がまだ若い頃の話です。先生はその後、 北王子魯山人さんが来て鎌倉に行ってしまわれるのですが、その間、4、5年の間修行をさせていただいたようです。そんな関係から接託によく立ち寄ってくださったことを覚えています。その後、日本伝統工芸展に応募するようになってからは、荒川先生に作品をよく見てもらい、指導してもらいました。
So I think we have time for just one last question. And I think that's from Monica, because we want to bring the conversation from the 20th century into the 21st century, having dwelt on the Ningen Kokuho system in the first 2 generations. What about for the 3rd generation of clay artists as we go forward? Monica?
Yes. So what does the Living National Treasure system mean for the younger generation of potters?
人間国宝についてどう思うかっていうことですね。はい。皆さんどう考えているのか、正直なところ全くわからないです。というのは私の父親がそういう存在だからか、客観的に見ることができないようです。私たちよりも上の世代の人たちは、それが最終目的みたいな、目標みたいなところがあって、何とかして掴み取りたいと頑張ってきたのだろうけど、今の若い人たちがどう考えているのかちょっと想像がつかないです。それでも展覧会でいわゆるその人間国宝の作品を見るときには何かをそこから学び取ろうとしている姿勢は強く感じるので、人間国宝という名前の響きは絶大なものがあるかもしれません。
Thank you so much, Suzuki Tetsu-san. That was very personal, and I'm sure not an easy thing to talk about as the son of one himself. And on that note, I would like to thank the Suzuki family for giving us this privilege and opportunity to bring the best of their work to New York. And I would like to thank many people in our audience tonight for supporting the work that they do. Several of the people who were with me in 2015 when we made that amazing visit to their house and were so graciously received are here with us tonight. So it's nice to have this event come full circle. And thank you to your father for bringing the best of the best to New York. I would like to also, if we go to the next slide, encourage you to stay tuned for the second half of the Fathers and Sons show that we are doing with the Wakao family. That will take place on the 8th with 2 different participants, another illustrious curator and another academic from another Midwestern university. So I hope we have an equally engaging conversation and that you can join us for that. And next slide. To go even further into the future, we're trying to do one of these in our amateurish fashion a month. And in November, we will have an exhibition of the work of Akiyama Yo and Kitamura Junko. And so I am taking the opportunity of trying to bring a panel discussion that we had in Tokyo with the launch of the Allure of Japanese Contemporary Ceramics in Tokyo in autumn of 2019, and bring a new panel together to talk about Japanese clay art and what is art and what is craft, and what the perception is in Japan and the perception is in America, and try to have an illuminating discussion with these 4 leaders in that field. And our last Zoom call of the year will be in conjunction with Hands and Earth, a traveling exhibition of the Horvitz, Jeffrey and Carol Horvitz's collection. They're here with us tonight. And this show will be at the Katona Museum, which is a mere hour drive out of New York. And hopefully Everything will be open in December, and we can all go and see this wonderful show. And we will be bringing a conversation with several of the artists represented in that show for that venue. So thank you all for coming tonight, staying with us. Big thank yous for our presenters for illuminating so much of what is about tradition, where tradition meets modernity, and I think stimulating us all. So thank you. Good night, everyone, and bon appetit.
Thank you.